You know as well as I know that the death of Senator Ed Kennedy is the death of a man, absolutely, and everything that he was to the people in his extended family. But we also understand it's the death of an era. One of the remaining, if not the remaining, linchpin of liberalism in this country is gone. And you all know what the term linchpin means. So with the death of Ted Kennedy last night, liberalism in this country has lost its champion, the person who, in the modern era, personified liberalism to a greater degree than anyone in Congress. And I think his death heralds the beginning of a very, very, very dark period in this country. I remember feeling that way in 1963 and again in 1968 when his two brothers were murdered by the right wing in this country. But Kennedy's death, when one considers his legislative record, I don't think there's an aspect of life in America that was not, that is on the progressive side, that is on the liberal side, that is on the caring side. Legislation designed to help people, not legislation designed to further the acquisition of power by corporations, not legislation designed to avoid responsibility by corporations, none of that. I'm talking about legislation passed by Congress over the past 40 years that seriously concerned itself with bettering the lives of people in this country. Each piece of that legislation can be directly or indirectly attributed to Senator Ed Kennedy. And there's nobody left at this point. There are still a couple of good men in Congress, yes. Still a couple of good senators. Bernie Sanders, I'm sure. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not going to go down the list. It's kind of pointless. But there's nobody left in the Senate or the House, and you pretty much have to stick with the Senate when you come to these monumental figures. There's no one left that speaks and thunders for the ideas of liberal politics being the basis on which this country was established, the basis on which any legislation over the course of this country that was ever passed, liberalism was there to jam it down the throats of or ignore the right-wingers in Congress, which would be Republicans and conservatives who never cared a tinker's damn about the American people or the American society. It's always been liberalism. Prairie 2 sent this in right before the show. Let me share it with you. Under the subject line, I thought I saw him walking up over the hill. Teddy Kennedy was capable of partying like a frat boy, as are most men of power and privilege. Something sanctimonious conservatives would constantly say proved he had no moral values. But his values weren't just empty campaign slogans, like the usual spew from the right. He wouldn't give a speech making promises to retirees in the morning and conspire to steal their life savings by afternoon. He was a rich kid who didn't need to work, just like George W. Bush. The difference is that Kennedy wanted to leave a legacy of peace and healing, not a trail of death and suffering. Was he a perfect man? Of course not. But he wasn't a cynical, smirking hypocrite. He had plenty, and he didn't need to steal more to prove he was the biggest man. He wasn't afraid of the unwashed masses. He didn't hold them in contempt, and he didn't see them as so much fodder for the mill. He was a liberal, like the men of history who created the United States. They weren't perfect either. But they and he changed things for the better. In the end, that's all you can ask of a public servant. Prairie 2. So Kennedy's death, that has been chronicled all day. Interestingly, I had to do it. After about an hour and a half or 2 hours of coverage today, I decided to see what the propaganda network was doing, and I switched to Fox News, and they were interviewing somebody about, not interviewing a rational person, but someone from their stable about, and it's eminently forgettable, whatever it was. And then again, just for the sheer hell of it, this afternoon, I watched a little bit of Hardball, Chris Matthews and all his guests talking about Kennedy, switched to CNN, Wolf Blitzer and his guests talking about Kennedy, and then went to the Suiciders program on Fox, which I honestly have never done before. And there was Beck, and he had as his guest Karl Rove. And before he started bringing Karl Rove into the discussion, Beck, in that inimitable way of a borderline sociopath and someone who has the potential to murder his own self, and probably will for the ratings, Beck was talking about an exoskeleton being created, a machine created by the Obama administration, into which was to be stuffed the remaining ideals of America, converted and hybridized into something horrible. What do you think, Carl? Carl, don't you feel the construction of this machine? I mean, it was the mad ravings of a lunatic. There is no question. None. So after about 2 minutes, no, this is not for me. So, because of the fact that you have been, like I have been, I stayed away from television today because, as is the tradition of television, when someone of the stature of Ted Kennedy dies, whether it is political stature or pop music stature, and yes, such a thing does exist, like Michael Jackson, the coverage becomes wall-to-wall and endless until, in its repetition, it starts to lose impact. For me, anyway, lose meaning. So I stayed away from it. I'll take my time in tracking down some of the videos that were put out there today about the legacy of this man. As I wrote in my little mini blog today, he was a central character in my life story, just by virtue of the fact that I was aware of his importance. He was a central character, whether we want to admit it or not, in every American's life story for the past 45, 50 years. There is no getting around it. There's just no way to get around it. And he was a central character in the national stories of so many foreign countries, from Ireland to South Africa. Ted Kennedy had the ability and the presence to understand how the human spirit needs to feel whole. And he worked toward that end. And he's going to be missed.